can never have too many tools. Shop DeWalt deals at Lowe's. Get a free Select DeWalt 20-volt max power tool when you buy a Select 20-volt max 5-amp-hour battery kit. Plus, get a free additional DeWalt 20-volt max 8-amp-hour battery when you buy a DeWalt 10-inch 20-volt max dual-bevel compounded miter saw. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 6/24 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, the Commanding General of U.S. Army Materiel Command, about advanced manufacturing, the logistical challenges of the Pacific, and why the Army is revamping the way it feeds its soldiers. And then we break down the U.S. Iran deal, President Trump's decision to invoke the Defense Production Act, and a major Pentagon review of U.S. force posture in Europe. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I am joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. We are less than a week away from Indo-Pac 2026 on June 24th at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. If you're in D.C. next week, come by and see us. Guy Taylor's hosting a great panel discussion on shipbuilding. I'll be moderating one on autonomy and uncrewed systems. I'll also be doing a fireside chat with Justin Finelli, the CTO of the Department of the Navy. Guy will be doing a fireside chat with Russ Vought, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, and a lot of other amazing content, all about American naval power, what we need for dominance, especially in the Pacific theater. We'll have some content from that event here on next week's podcast. But this week, we have Lieutenant General Chris Mohan of Army Materiel Command back on the show to talk about advanced manufacturing, Army logistics, and a behind-the-scenes battle over the Army's dining system, which is really interesting stuff that I think most people probably are not aware of. But Guy, before we get to that, first things first, as always, what is on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. Of course, I'm tracking the U.S. Iran Memorandum of Understanding. It's tricky here on the podcast as we release new episodes at dawn every Friday morning, Washington, D.C. time, and the Trump administration's Iran developments always seem to happen on Friday nights or through the weekend. So there are likely twists and turns happening in real time as listeners take in this episode. Let's call it a big ceasefire deal, Ben. Let me just cut to the chase, okay? Israel has said that its military troops will be staying in southern Lebanon to continue trying to crush Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is a reality that could at any time derail the U.S.-Iran deal. The Israelis released a map on June 18 of a quote, security zone, end quote, in southern Lebanon that stretches from Israel's northern border about 6 miles into Lebanese territory. The question now is, how are the Iranians going to respond to that? Tehran has consistently stated that inking a lasting ceasefire with the U.S. and entering into real follow-on nuclear negotiations with the Trump administration would be contingent on Israel stopping its campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. As for the U.S.-Iran agreement as it stands now, the Trump administration has lifted the U.S. military-imposed blockade of Iranian ports and will grant waivers to Iran to export oil. This essentially means cash for the ruling military and Islamist regime in Tehran. In exchange, the Iranians have agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for shipping for the next 60 days and participate in these serious follow-on nuclear negotiations with the U.S. Critics look at all of this and say, what did America really achieve here? Was it worth it? Weren't we at this stage before the war started? Maybe. Really visceral critics say the U.S. created a new market for defense companies to compete for replenishing American military weapon stocks. The bottom line, however, is that Iran's military capabilities and leadership as well as Iran's nuclear production centers, have been pounded by U.S. strikes. The Iranian government remains in power, but it's been set back dramatically. So we will continue to track in the daily threat status newsletter how all of this impacts the pursuit of a meaningful future U.S. Iran diplomatic deal to rid Iran of its nuclear weapons ambitions, something President Trump has said was the major goal all along. Let me pivot to one other thing, Ben, and that's the way in which Ukraine's military is making some major gains against Russia right now. A week ago on the podcast, we highlighted Ukraine's announcement of plans to domestically develop a ballistic missile program capable of targeting Moscow. That remains a ways off, but the Ukrainians are already using drones to pound the Russian capital. They carried out a major attack on June 18 that hit an oil refinery in Moscow, sending black smoke over the city and shutting down all of Moscow's airports for several hours. This has to be sobering for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who actually spent recent days trying to shift attention away from his war in Ukraine and focus instead on trying to drum up economic deals and support from Southeast Asian leaders. Putin hosted leaders from Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, and U.S. military ally, the Philippines, along with others from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, at a meeting in the Russian city of Kazan. It got little attention in the English language media space, Ben, and it was interesting, actually, that there was little criticism expressed by the ASEAN nations of Russia's war in Ukraine. Of course, all of those nations notably are beholden to trade with China, which tacitly backs Russia in Ukraine.
You know, as you talk about Ukraine and Russia, it's of course, impossible from our seat here in the United States to separate it from NATO, from America's force posture in Europe. And that's very much in the news right now today, as we record this on Thursday, because Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in Brussels and gave a pretty blistering speech to NATO allies at a NATO defense ministers conference there, again saying how they need to take the lead on European security. A lot of those same talking points we've heard from President Trump, Vice President Vance, and others over the years. But what's different here is Hegseth saying that the Pentagon is launching a 6-month review of U.S. force posture and basing in Europe. This is designed, he says, to ensure that America's allies eventually take the lead in their own defense. We'll see what that review actually looks like. But as a quick refresher, remember, the U.S. has between 80,000 and 100,000 troops in Europe at any given time. The exact numbers, of course, fluctuate. About 10,000 in Poland, 35,000 active duty in Germany, the largest contingent of any country on the continent. Poland's, of course, angling to kind of supplant Germany as the hub of U.S. military presence in Europe, something our colleague John Seward has done some really great reporting on recently from Europe. So, we've seen these kinds of reviews before, force posture realignments and the like. I don't know if this is going to be any different. Are there actually going to be major lasting changes here, or is this just another review or report that kind of gets swept aside in a filing cabinet somewhere? We'll see. But either way, it's pretty clear, it was today if you saw any of this speech, that Defense Secretary Hegseth is publicly, as we've seen, and privately trying to position himself as a major change agent inside the Pentagon. His whole acquisition, procurements, and defense industrial base reform push is, whether you like it or not, could be one of the biggest and most sweeping attempts at fundamental change we've seen in the defense sector and inside the Pentagon in decades. And there's a lot happening on that now, too, right before our eyes in real time this week, because in a June 11th memo to Secretary Hegseth made public just this week, President Trump invoked the Cold War era Defense Production Act, meant to spur the production of more munitions, stockpiles of which have been dwindling, partly because of the war in Iran that Guy just talked about, and also a lot of American military aid to allies like Ukraine and Israel over the years. Now, the Defense Production Act has been invoked a lot over the years. Both Trump and President Biden used it during the COVID-19 pandemic to help the production of medical equipment. Trump's used it other times. President Obama, Clinton, they used it as well. So that's not new. But I think what caught my eye here, Guy, is sort of the rationale behind why they're doing it this time. Because Michael Catanazzi, the Pentagon's Assistant Secretary of War for Industrial Base Policy, said they're using it this time to bring defense companies together, to have them collaborate in order to produce stuff in a way that otherwise wouldn't violate federal antitrust laws. So they're described as voluntary agreements. I'm not sure how voluntary they actually are going to be.
It's interesting, Ben. These developments certainly create an impression of expanding White House power over discretionary spending at a moment of record level U.S. defense budgets. One area we're actually watching closely is the Defense Autonomous Warfare Group, or DOG, an entity that's been set up inside the Pentagon since the Trump administration took power. The administration has requested some $55 billion for DOG in the 2027 National Defense Authorization, which is yet to be approved by Congress. Once it is approved, that pool of money may be directed however the administration sees fit, with little secondary oversight from the Senate and House. I know there are listeners who would debate me on that, and I'll leave it up to listeners to mull the implications of what I just said.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's just one of these multiple areas where the Pentagon's kind of just sort of overhauling the way it does all of it. In this particular case, what we're seeing now with this potential Defense Production Act invocation, we're talking about, I think, the production of things like solid rocket motors, which are crucial for precision weapons like missiles, missile interceptors like Patriots and THAADs. We've used a lot of those in the Iran war, and so have allies in the region. So, look, the government's telling or maybe strongly suggesting that private defense contractors figure out ways to have their supply chains and assembly lines and their corporate offices and purchasers work together to get stuff into the hands of American troops more quickly.
Faster. Right.
Faster. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I think that's, you take the DOG that you just mentioned, and then you add to that just over the past couple of days, the Pentagon announces over $1 billion in conditional loan guarantees to companies that are processing rare earth elements, including, by the way, Phoenix Tailings. Nick Myers, the CEO of Phoenix Tailings, was on this show last year. So if you need a primer about rare earth elements and why they're so important, go listen to that episode.
Rare earths, Ben, of course, are essential to advanced defense tech manufacturing on the domestic front.
Electronics, fighter jets, cell phones, and a lot more. So you take all of that, add one more to the list. The Pentagon's taken a direct financial stake, in an L3 Harris spinoff company that's making solid rocket motors. So you put all of this stuff together, and we're just watching this historic fundamental shift kind of materialize before our eyes in the defense industrial base and the federal government's relationship with major defense companies all across the board in this sector. And we are joined now by Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, the commanding general of U.S. Army Materiel Command. General Mohan has served all over the country and all over the world. He's deployed multiple times in support of Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, among other missions. And General Mohan, you're also part of a very distinguished and prestigious class, which is multiple-time guests here on this show. You and I also did a video interview together at AUSA last year in Washington. So we know each other a little bit, and I always enjoy speaking with you. Guy and I are really grateful to have you back here on the Threat Status Podcast.
Yeah. And hey, thanks for having me again. And I'd love to kind of rehash some of the stuff we did and talk to you about progress we made since the last time we talked, because what I believe firmly is that, look, we have to continue to show that the things we're saying that we're going to do, that we're actually doing them and closing gaps, because we got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. We're going to get into that in just a second. But right off the top here, I wanted to start with a question about the Indo-Pacific, mainly because it's top of mind for us, because Threat Status next week is hosting a major event on June 24th at the Navy Memorial in Washington on this subject with Russ Vought of OMB, Navy Chief Technology Officer Justin Finelli, Senators Deb Fischer, Todd Young, and other officials and across the government and from the defense industry. And I know the Indo-Pacific is a kind of a major central component for everything the military is doing logistically, moving stuff, and in your case, that the Army would need in that theater. I'm not going to ask you if it's harder to move material to or around the Indo-Pacific, because I know it is when compared to Europe, for example. But I'm curious, in your view, do you think that it affects the United States military strategically? If we end up in a conflict, God forbid, with China in the Pacific, do we need to make different strategic decisions because of the physical challenges presented by those distances and the vast open waters and how hard it is to get things to the people that we need? Is that kind of a strategic issue, you think, potentially?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it drives action on our standpoint. And so, for example, two different things that we're doing, primarily focused on CONUS right now with an eye on Indo-PACOM, and all revolving around advanced manufacturing. And so recently the secretary designated me as the lead integrator and lifecycle manager for all things advanced manufacturing for the Army. And so we're building that one from the inside out. And so not only focused on the capabilities we have within the organic industrial base, but also bringing on trusted commercial vendors to do advanced manufacturing for us. And then with an eye on trusted partners and coalition members, as well as and qualifying them in a digital environment, right? So that we can move the requirements to the capability forward to shorten some of the supply lines we have, because it's all about it's all about the tyranny of transportation in the Pacific. So that would be one for producing parts as well as components for missiles, et cetera, et cetera. The other one is advanced manufacturing of facilities. And so we've got a couple of examples here in the United States where we are 3D printing buildings. And so we've 3D printed barracks at Fort Bliss. We did this several years ago. Soldiers are living in them now. We're doing 10 more barracks there, but we're getting ready to print an entire complex at Fort Polk, where all the units that rotate through Fort, we're going to print the entire complex. We will cut the ribbon on that at the end of this month. But our partner there, we have the same vision of being able to 3D print contingency facilities with an eye on Indo-PACOM. And so instead of hauling building materials, we would haul the machinery to do it and then use local aggregate to build things like munition storage facilities, temporary and permanent structures, et cetera, et cetera. So we're really focused on that capability moving it forward.
Okay. On this question of the organic industrial base, AMC's 23 depots, arsenals, ammunition plants, I saw Lieutenant General Lawrence from AMC recently talk about them as, quote, modern data-driven production modes, unquote, turning them into that. What does that exactly mean? We're talking about the intersection of technology, data, and raw physical material, metal bullets, medical gear, vehicle parts, that kind of stuff. So what does data-driven production mean in that context?
Yeah, so it starts with the digital thread and the digital backbone. So if we think about a very simple Class 9 repair part, right, a bracket for a vehicle, having the sufficient tech data and having that up to a point where we can hang it in a digital repository. So we have recently rebuilt our digital repository. We have 1,000+ parts that are in that, and then being able to move those digits around to where we have machine time, because some prints will take days and hours and days potentially to print. And so connecting those printers to a network so that we can see where we have capacity to move those around is one thing. The other is also investing in modern day capacity. So titanium printing, carbon fiber based printing, we're investing in all that, and that capability is coming online as well. But it starts with the tech data too, Ben. It starts with the tech data, and the Army's leading the charge with the Secretary saying, "Hey, look, we've got to have the tech data. We've got to build it into contracts. Industry needs to give it to us, but we're not waiting, right?" So we're investing with some academia partners to build us digital twins of our major combat systems that are designed for advanced manufacturing, so we can do that.
General Mohan, it's Guy Taylor. Senator John Cornyn last week introduced legislation that would require the Department of Defense to establish, this is what I'm reading from his press release, establish through the Office of the Undersecretary of War for Research and Engineering a pilot program to evaluate the safety, quality, and qualification pathways of printable energetic materials for defense innovation. What's your take on that? Isn't Army Materiel Command already doing that?
And so Guy, I'm not familiar with his proposal or amendment or whatever, but here's what I can tell you: that from a standpoint of being able to reverse engineer, get the right material qualities, and then produce, we are there, and we're moving. We're accelerating. But when you interject energetics into it, I think we are well postured to drive on that as well. So let's think about a UAS body that instead of printing that with out of carbon fiber, we have a thing called a CBAM machine which is an advanced carbon fiber-based material. So what if we could, instead of printing that out of a carbon fiber really light, that we could print it out of an energetic material? And so the entire fuselage, the entire body of the whatever we're doing is an energetic material that can be part of the payload. I think that we're well postured to be able to do that. We have talked to a couple of academia partners that are actually experimenting with it, because we understand explosives and we understand electronics and the relationships between them, and we have the necessary capability of storage, et cetera, and transportation. So we're well postured to do that.
What is the level of institutional resistance that you're encountering when you have these kind of conversations in the sort of joint force integration discussion across the services with your partners?
I don't think that there is resistance. I think that there is that the technology is moving so fast. It's awareness and synchronization that we believe, and firmly in AMC, that with the secretary putting and saying, "Hey, look, hey, you're the lead material integrator and the lead for the Army." This just recently happened at the end of April, first part of May, and we have entered the net, Army Materiel Command, if you will, with OSW to start having those conversations to get in the game. So I think it's just synchronization is because the space is moving so fast, as well as integrating in the things that we're doing with commercial industry at our depots and arsenals to rapidly advanced manufacturing.
I want to get to food here in a second, General, but just one thing while we're on this subject of how fast things are changing and data and information. How do you at AMC kind of handle the danger of data overload, information overload with your folks? I mean, there's access to so much. It would seem like you have to kind of almost narrowly focus on, this is the job that I have to do. This is what I have to sort of intake and process and deal with on a day-to-day basis, and not get distracted by all this huge volume of other stuff and information that's out there. How hard is that to deal with?
Yeah, so the governance is the only term I can tell you. So Weapons 360 is something we started about 18, 19 months ago to look deeper into the supply chain. And that was internal to us, just to try to help us see it. And then we showed it to a couple of people, and it's like if you give a mouse a cookie, right? And that has exploded now, that Weapons 360 is now the source of truth for some very strategic Army battle rhythm events that we do, like the Total Army Readiness Review, the TAR that we do once a month with the Chief of Staff of the Army. Now we're using Weapons 360 as that. And now we're having discussions about, okay, well, who gets access to it? You know, so do we give all this data that all the way down to, hey, we've got a delinquent delivery for this, and here's the name of the president of the company, and we can see that now, which we've never been able to see. Or, hey, here's the worst tank in the Army, you know, from a standpoint of how much resources it's consuming. So we're having those discussions about who gets that, so that we don't have a bunch of very well-meaning folks monkeying with the supply chain. So that's all governance from our standpoint of data.
Yeah, it's a different kind of need to know, right?
That's exactly right.
To know what the worst can.
That's exactly right. But we have AI tools running in systems now that we could say, hey, look, I've got $50 million to place against M1 readiness. What should we do with it? And within about 3 minutes, it can spit out, hey, you need to do the following things by bumper number. We have never been able to see that before, and we can see it now.
You know, the focus is often, and rightfully so, on drones or firearms or vehicles or things like that. But I know, you know, how things like housing and food and quality of life are, of course, important, because if that stuff's not up to par and quality of life isn't where it should be, that impacts soldiers in a negative way, just like it impacts any of us as civilians if we don't have good food to eat, for example. What's AMC doing on that front, on the food front? Because I know that's a very important issue to you personally, and you're excited to talk about it.
So I am very excited to talk about it, because we've been working this for about 3 years to rebuild, because quite frankly, we took our eye off the ball, and our soldiers let us know. And what the situation is in a lot of our post camps and stations, soldiers will drive past multiple dining facilities and go off post. Soldiers who are authorized a meal card, that we have a moral responsibility to provide them 3 meals a day. they will drive past our dining facilities and go off post and spend their own money to buy food. And so we unpacked the entire system of why that was happening, and it was multiple reasons. It was ineffective contracts. It was special interest groups. It was limited meal hours, et cetera, et cetera. And so we broke it and we've rebuilt it. And now we've got 2 dining facilities open that are under our new model, one at Fort Hood, Texas, and one at Fort Carson, Colorado. We have a pilot program that we've been authorized to do 5 different installations. And look, Ben, this is the easiest thing in the world for us to measure because we collect the data of every soldier that comes in and eats at one of these facilities, and they have the opportunity to vote with their feet. And so our Fort Hood dining facility was pre-transition to our campus-style dining venue, was serving about 400 to 500 people a day. It is consistently now serving over 3,000 a day. At Fort Carson, about 700 to 800 a day, 3,200 a day. And we've got enough data to know that this was not just a flash in the pan of it's the new big thing. It's consistent, even on payday weekends. And the food quality is 10 times better. The hours are 10 times better. And it's actually cheaper for the taxpayer as well. So per plate at Fort Carson is 26% cheaper per plate. Although not the primary reason we were doing this to save money. And at Fort Hood, cheaper market, lower cost of living, it's about 10 to 11% cheaper per plate.
See, this is fascinating to me because this is an issue that doesn't get enough attention, and it should. You mentioned like special interest groups. I mean, who are they? What's happening behind the scenes? I mean, are there people who are afraid of losing money because you make these kinds of changes? It seems like there's almost some, internal politics, if you will, behind how this kind of all plays out on basis. Take us behind the scenes of that a little bit, if you can. Yeah.
So, have you ever heard of the Randolph-Shepard Act? Started in the 1930s to give opportunities for disadvantaged persons, administered by the Department of Education. Several years ago, a federal judge made a determination that at the request of the special interest groups, that military dining facilities would be considered cafeterias. And so because they're on federal property, we fall under the auspices of the Randolph-Shepard Act. And so what this forces us to do is contract not with a company, but contract with the state. And so the state of Colorado, we have contracts with the state licensing agency, who then in turn subcontracts to blind vendors. And we have 13 companies that are subcontracted to. They employ a total number, because we've done the research, of 13 blind people. And it's just the owners of the company. And because they are deemed as being part of the competitive range, we are literally forced to give them the contracts. Those contracts run us about 30% more. We're bound by capacity versus paying for what we use. This is as close to anything, and I'll say it out loud, as close to institutional corruption as anything I've ever dealt with in my professional career. And we are breaking that with our campus-style dining venue because the Secretary of Education has given us a reprieve from Randolph-Shepard for the United States Army. We are working with Congress to get the law changed. And here's how I know that there's a lot of money in it, right? Because certain industry folks are beating the doors on the Hill, as well as the special interest groups, to try to shut it down. And we are laser focused on getting this scaled across the Army, and they're trying to stop us.
Talk about unintended consequences.
That's exactly right. It's the death of 1,000 cuts. And it's just bad business. And here's the kicker: the state licensing agency administrated only for federal property. So we are prohibited from under our previous construct from doing the same things that the University of Alabama does here in Alabama, because they're on state property.
Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, Commanding General of U.S. Army Materiel Command. Thanks so much for coming back on the Threat Status Podcast, General.
Thank you, sir.
You got it. Thanks. And I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for what you guys are doing.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week. our weekly segment here in the show where we each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now. This week, as you listen to the podcast, Guy, what do you have for us as your threat of the week?
My threat of the week, Ben, is maybe pedestrian and big picture, but I feel like it has to be said. And it's that billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars could be wasted as Washington moves toward record level defense spending and a potential $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget in 2027 after decades in which trillions were spent fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. is suddenly in a moment of historic funding for a much needed domestic defense industrial base revitalization. The money is there. While there's great talk of acquisition reform, expediency, and efficiency, Ben, my threat of the week is that without the right kind of oversight, the moment could be wasted.
Not forget the Pentagon has yet to pass a full financial audit. So that could become important later when we start talking about $1.5 trillion defense budget. My threat of the week is this alleged plot to unleash explosive drones and sniper fire at the recent UFC Freedom 250 event at the White House. Prosecutors allege that this plot was meant to jumpstart basically a revolution and maybe even intended to kill President Trump and other top political figures. Authorities said the plotters also meant to kill Vice President Vance, Elon Musk, Republican lawmakers who support Israel, and other figures. I think most listeners have probably read about this by now. If you haven't, go check out Matt Delaney's work at the Washington Times. He's been all over this story, including some new details on the alleged perpetrators. But the reason it's my threat is because, allegedly at least, it's a tangible example of a subject we've talked about on this show many times. We had Congressman Michael McCall on last year talking about how it's a huge concern for lawmakers and for law enforcement, the idea of drones, small drones that can carry explosives or be equipped with anything else that can cause harm, at big gatherings like America 250 events, the World Cup, Super Bowl, Olympics, or a UFC fight on the White House lawn. This one was foiled, thankfully, by law enforcement, but, we're kind of out of a theoretical realm now, it seems, with this sort of thing. There are individuals, at least according to prosecutors, planning to actually use drones to inflict carnage at major domestic events. That's going to be a big issue, I think, for a long time to come in America, and that's why it's my threat of the week. And with that, Guy, thanks once again. Please, if you haven't already, go sign up for IndoPAC 2026 on June 24th at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. We hope to see you there. A huge thanks this week to Lieutenant General Chris Mohan from Army Materiel Command. And most of all, thanks to all of you, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button and share with all of your friends. And we'll be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.